I've always lived a pretty simple life, nothing too exciting or out of the ordinary. I'm in my mid 20s now, working a regular 9 to 5 job in a small town where everyone knows everyone, and the pace of life is slow and steady. My days usually consist of working, catching up with a few friends over coffee, and spending time with Jake. He's been my boyfriend for about 3 years now, and I always thought we were the perfect match. He's kind, thoughtful, and, to be honest, I trusted him more than anyone else. I'd never once questioned his loyalty. We made plans for the future together, talked about traveling, maybe even moving into a house someday, and I thought everything was just right. Our relationship was solid, or at least, that's how it felt to me. We didn't argue much, and whenever something small came up, we'd talk it through. There was this comfort in knowing I could count on him for anything. That sense of security was something I thought I'd always have, and for a long time, I truly believed we were in this for the long haul. My friends always told me how lucky I was to have someone like Jake, and I couldn't agree more. He seemed like the kind of guy who would never hurt me. But everything changed one night when I found out something that would shatter my trust in ways I never thought possible. It started out as something small, just a feeling I couldn't shake off. I didn't know exactly what it was, but something felt off. I didn't want to be paranoid, especially not after so many years together, but there was this nagging thought that I just couldn't ignore. Little things started to add up, things I brushed off at first. And then, one day, I found out what had been going on behind my back. I never thought he'd do it, but I found out the hard way. I still remember the first time I met Jake, how everything just clicked. It was one of those random, spontaneous moments that felt like fate. I was at a small cafe in the heart of the town, trying to get a coffee before work when I bumped into him. Literally bumped into him. He was holding a book in his hands and didn't see me coming. It was so embarrassing, but Jake just laughed it off, making a joke about how I'd knocked his book out of his hands. I remember being surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. It was like we'd known each other forever, and within minutes, we were both laughing and exchanging stories about life. We hit it off right away. From that day on, we started spending more time together. We'd go on long walks, sit in the park, talk about everything under the sun, our dreams, where we saw ourselves in the future, and all the little things that make life feel big. We would talk for hours about silly stuff and deep stuff, about our families, our goals, and the things we hoped to achieve. There was this connection between us, like we were on the same wavelength. It felt easy and natural, like we were inseparable from the start. Jake was always there for me, and I never had a reason to doubt him. He was sweet, thoughtful, and incredibly reliable. If I needed him, he was there, whether it was a late-night phone call or helping me through a rough day at work. He would surprise me with little gestures, like leaving cute notes on my desk or sending a text just to check in. Our relationship felt like the perfect balance. He was the kind of guy who made me feel safe, secure, and valued, and I couldn't imagine my life without him. Our friends and family loved him too. My parents would always talk about how lucky I was to have found someone like Jake, and my friends would tease me about how I had the perfect boyfriend. There was never a sign, not even a hint, that anything could go wrong. To everyone around us, Jake was exactly who he seemed to be: caring, trustworthy, and totally in love with me. He had no red flags, no issues that raised any concerns. Our life together felt like it was heading exactly where I wanted it to go. But looking back now, there were small things I should have noticed, things I brushed off because I didn't want to believe they meant anything. Jake had started canceling plans more frequently, sometimes at the last minute, leaving me feeling confused and a little hurt. He'd apologize, say it was work or some other issue, and I'd forgive him without hesitation. It wasn't like him, but I thought maybe he was just stressed out. Everyone has their bad days, right? I didn't want to overthink it, especially when he was so quick to reassure me that everything was fine. Then there were the moments when I'd ask about his social media, just out of curiosity, and he'd get defensive. Not in a major way, but enough to make me feel like I was stepping over some invisible line. "It's just personal stuff," he'd say, or "Why do you need to check my phone?" It felt odd at the time, but I brushed it off as him being protective of his privacy. Maybe I was being too nosy. Still, the doubts lingered in the back of my mind. And then there were the times he'd disappear for hours without explanation. He'd say he was busy with work or catching up with friends, but there was always something about the way he said it that felt off, like he was avoiding the truth. I didn't want to push him too much, so I let it slide. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild, or maybe he really was just stressed out with everything going on in his life. But deep down, there was this feeling that I couldn't shake, that something wasn't quite right. Could these little things be clues to something bigger? Or was I just looking for problems where there were none? The small signs had started to add up, and it was becoming harder to ignore them. At first, I convinced myself that it was just stress, or maybe I was reading too much into things. But then, one evening, everything changed. Jake and I had plans to go out, something we had been looking forward to all week. I was excited, had picked out my outfit, and was ready to spend a few hours enjoying each other's company. But when I called him to check in, his voice sounded off. He told me there was an emergency work situation that he had to take care of. He seemed rushed, almost defensive. It didn't feel right, but I didn't want to make a scene, so I said okay, understanding that sometimes work can be unpredictable. But that night, something in my gut told me it wasn't just work. I tried calling him a few hours later, but he didn't pick up. Texts went unanswered, and that familiar feeling of unease started to settle in. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe he was just busy. But when he still didn't respond by the time I went to bed, the worry turned into suspicion. I couldn't help but wonder what was really going on. What emergency work could keep him from answering for so long? The next day, I found myself thinking back to the evening. Something wasn't adding up. Then it happened. I overheard a conversation when I walked into the living room and found him on the phone. It wasn't just any conversation, it was defensive, and Jake's tone was different. I couldn't catch all the details, but I heard enough to know something was off. His voice had this edge, like he was hiding something. I caught the tail end of the conversation where he said, "You need to stop calling me. I am with someone." I froze in place, my heart racing. What did that mean? Was he talking to someone else? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my mind couldn't stop racing. I hadn't heard him speak to anyone like that before, and the way he said it, it just didn't sit right. I tried to tell myself it could have been innocent, that maybe it was just a friend or something work-related. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next few days were filled with this quiet, nagging doubt. I tried to push it aside, but I couldn't ignore it. I started paying more attention to his habits, his mannerisms, his phone usage. And that's when I started to notice more things that didn't add up. I found myself checking his social media, something I never thought I'd do. I didn't want to invade his privacy, but something told me I needed to. What I found shocked me. Old photos that I'd never seen before, photos with women who weren't me. And there were comments under those photos, comments from people I didn't recognize. They were flirty, maybe even a little too comfortable for friends. My heart sank. I couldn't stop scrolling, and the more I looked, the more questions I had. There were messages too, ones that seemed too intimate to be just friendly banter. But what did it all mean? Could these be old friends he had lost touch with, or was I really seeing something I didn't want to? I felt paranoid, irrational even. But at the same time, it was hard to ignore the mounting evidence. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself it could all be innocent, that I was just being overly sensitive. But it wasn't just the social media, it was the way he was acting. The way he'd cancel plans at the last minute. The way he was suddenly unreachable when I needed him most. And now, the conversation I overheard, the hidden messages, it all pointed to something I wasn't ready to face. I decided not to confront him right away. Part of me was afraid of what I might find, and another part of me wanted to be sure I wasn't overreacting. Was I being insecure? Was I reading too much into things? Or was my gut telling me something I needed to hear? Every day I spent with Jake felt like I was walking on a tightrope, trying to balance my trust in him with the growing suspicion that something was off. But I wasn't ready to let go of everything we had built just yet. So I kept quiet, collecting more pieces to the puzzle, hoping that the answers would reveal themselves before I had to face the truth. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, but one day I found myself doing something I promised I'd never do. I decided to check Jake's phone. It wasn't that I didn't trust him, at least not at first. But the doubts, the gut feeling that something was wrong, had been gnawing at me for weeks. Jake was away on a work trip, and the house felt empty without him. I had this overwhelming sense of needing to know the truth, to see for myself if my suspicions were valid or if I was just imagining things. It was something I would never have considered doing in the past. I had always prided myself on our trust, but that day, something inside me told me I needed to know. So, I picked up his phone from the counter. He had left it unlocked, probably distracted by packing for his trip. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it, my heart racing in my chest. The first few apps I glanced at didn't reveal anything suspicious, just work emails, news updates, and the usual stuff. But then I opened his text messages. What I found was nothing short of a bombshell. I scrolled through the conversations, and then I saw it, a thread of messages that didn't belong. It was clear that they weren't just from a friend, not even close. There was a woman's name, someone I didn't recognize. Her messages were flirtatious, suggestive, and at times, downright intimate. My heart dropped into my stomach. I froze for a moment, my eyes scanning each message over and over again. How long had this been going on? The messages weren't recent. Some of them dated back months ago, long before I ever noticed anything strange. Each text was like a gut punch, a painful reminder that I had been living a lie. The sweet, loving boyfriend I thought I knew, the one I trusted without question, had been hiding this entire side of himself from me. I couldn't even bring myself to fully comprehend what I was seeing. I had imagined a lot of things, but this was so much worse than anything I had anticipated. These messages painted a picture of a Jake I didn't recognize, a Jake who was more than just a little flirty. These were emotional, personal conversations. Words of affection, secret plans to meet, inside jokes, everything that should have been mine. I closed the phone and felt the weight of it all settle on my chest. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Was this just one mistake? One slip-up? Or was it something deeper, something that had been going on for far longer than I had realized? I was torn between anger, disbelief, and a deep, aching sadness. How had I been so blind to this? How had I trusted someone who had been so deceptive? When Jake returned from his trip a few days later, I couldn't hide the pain in my eyes. He could tell something was wrong, but he didn't know the half of it. I was still in shock, struggling to find the right words to express what I was feeling. He asked me if everything was okay, but the truth was, I didn't know what was okay anymore. I couldn't look at him the same way. I couldn't pretend that things were fine, not when I knew what I knew. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I confronted him, and the words spilled out of me in a rush. "Jake, I found the texts," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on? Who is she?" His face went pale, and for a moment, I thought he might break down. But instead, he did the opposite. He got defensive almost immediately. His voice was strained as he tried to explain. "It's not what you think," he said quickly, almost too quickly. "It was just harmless flirting. It was nothing serious. Just a phase." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A phase? I echoed, my voice shaking with disbelief. Months of messages, Jake, months of secret conversations. How is that harmless? How is that just a phase? He hesitated, looking uncomfortable. His eyes darted around, trying to find an excuse that would make sense of the mess he had created. "Look, it didn't mean anything," he said, his tone defensive now, trying to make it sound like it was no big deal. "I was just bored. You were busy with work, and I was just talking to someone. It wasn't like that." I never meant to hurt you." His words made my blood boil. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear him justify this. "You don't get it, do you, Jake?" I said, my voice trembling with anger and hurt. "This isn't just a little mistake. This is betrayal. You lied to me, and you kept this from me for months. You didn't just flirt with her. You had a whole secret life, and I was left in the dark." He tried to apologize, but the damage was already done. Slowly, the details started spilling out, one by one. The more he talked, the more the truth came into focus. There had been more than just flirtation. There had been plans to meet up, promises he had made, and even confessions of feelings for her. Every word he said twisted the knife deeper into my chest, each revelation more painful than the last. This wasn't just a phase or a mistake, it was a full-blown betrayal. I stood there, heartbroken, trying to make sense of it all. How could I have been so wrong about him? How could someone I trusted so completely do this to me? And in that moment, I realized just how much I had truly been living a lie. The days that followed felt like a blur. I couldn't shake the weight of the betrayal that had crashed down on me. I was devastated, utterly heartbroken. The person I had trusted the most in the world, the person I thought I would build a future with, had shattered everything in the most unimaginable way. It wasn't just about the lies or the deceit. It was about how he made me feel. I felt embarrassed, humiliated even, for not seeing the signs earlier. How could I have been so blind? How had I let this happen? I spent the next few days in a daze, completely withdrawing from everyone around me. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to explain what had happened. I didn't even know how to explain it. I found myself crying more than I ever had, in private, in the quiet of my apartment, unable to escape the constant thoughts racing through my mind. How had I been so wrong about him? How had I not seen the cracks in our relationship? The realization that someone I trusted so deeply had been lying to me for so long was suffocating. My friends and family tried to reach out, offering their support, but nothing seemed to ease the pain. They comforted me, telling me I was better off without him, that I deserved someone who would treat me with the love and respect I had given to Jake. But no matter how much they said it, the betrayal still clung to me like a heavy fog. I couldn't stop replaying the moments, the signs I had ignored, the things I had brushed off. Had this all been an illusion? Was anything real? The question kept haunting me. Had I been living in a fantasy? Was my love for Jake just something I had built in my mind, or was it real for him too? The uncertainty made the hurt even worse. And as much as my friends tried to assure me that it wasn't my fault, that I didn't deserve any of it, a small part of me wondered how I had missed it all. How could I have been so naive? But after days of internal turmoil, of sleepless nights and tears, I came to a decision. It wasn't easy. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but I knew I couldn't stay with Jake. I couldn't keep living in a relationship that was built on lies. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It wasn't even about understanding what had happened. It was about self-respect. I deserved more than the betrayal he had given me. I deserved honesty, trust, and loyalty. And most importantly, I deserved to feel safe in my own heart. The moment I made the decision to walk away, there was a strange sense of clarity. It hurt like hell, but it also felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I could feel the fear creeping in, fear of being alone, fear of losing him for good. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that fear wasn't enough to hold me back. I knew I couldn't continue to stay in a relationship where my trust had been broken so thoroughly. When I told him it was over, his face showed shock and disbelief, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't going to let his apologies or excuses sway me anymore. I had to stand firm. The look in his eyes was filled with confusion, but it didn't matter. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for me. Walking away from him, even though it felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest, was empowering. I had never felt more certain of my own strength. I didn't need him. I didn't need to beg for answers or explanations. I had my own worth, and I was not going to settle for anything less than someone who would value me the way I deserved. The realization hit me hard as I closed the door behind me. I was stronger than I had given myself credit for. I had survived the pain, and I would heal. But even with that newfound strength, the pain lingered. I could feel it in every corner of my being. The love I thought I had was gone, replaced by emptiness. And though I was proud of myself for walking away, there was still that ache, the ache of the future I had lost, the life I thought I was going to have. The journey to healing would be long, but I knew it was the only path forward. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. It was hard not to. The lessons were difficult, but they were there, etched in every painful memory. I realized that I had been so consumed by the idea of love, by the hope that Jake and I would have this perfect future together, that I had ignored the red flags, the small signs that something wasn't right. My trust in him had been blinding, and it led me down a path I never expected. I had let my heart be clouded by the dream of what could be, instead of seeing the reality of what was. I couldn't help but feel foolish. How could I have been so blind? How had I let myself be deceived for so long? There were times when I felt like the biggest fool, questioning everything I thought I knew about love and trust. But as time went on, I started to understand. It wasn't just about being fooled by Jake. It was about me too. I had allowed myself to be so vulnerable, so open, that I'd ignored my own boundaries. I had placed my self-worth in his hands, and that's where I had gone wrong. It wasn't just his betrayal that hurt. It was how I had allowed myself to forget who I was in the process. But through this painful realization came something important: forgiveness. I had to forgive myself. I couldn't change the past, no matter how much I wanted to. I couldn't undo the mistakes I made, the chances I gave him, or the trust one placed in him. But I could stop punishing myself for being vulnerable. I could stop feeling ashamed for believing in something that wasn't real. I had to accept that vulnerability was a part of who I was. It was part of what made me capable of loving deeply. And even though it hurt, it was a lesson in my growth. I had to learn how to trust again, but this time, I would trust myself first. Months passed, and with each passing day, I felt myself becoming more like the person I used to be before all of this happened. Slowly but surely, I started dating again. Not out of desperation, but out of a desire to understand what I truly wanted in a relationship. I took my time, reflecting on my needs, on my boundaries, and on what I would and wouldn't tolerate. I was cautious, perhaps too cautious at first, but I knew that I couldn't afford to make the same mistakes again. I promised myself that I would never compromise my self-respect, never allow myself to be blindsided by someone else's lies. I was worth more than that, and I was never going to forget it again. The longer I stayed away from Jake, the more I realized how little he truly meant to me now. Time had passed, and the pain, though it never fully went away, became more of a dull ache than a sharp wound. I hadn't heard from him in a while, and as much as I used to think about him, I realized that I was no longer consumed by thoughts of what could have been. I was living my life for me now, and that was something I hadn't done in a long time. I had learned to stand on my own, to build a life that was mine and mine alone,